In this episode of our series on how to play Reality's Edge, we are going to talk about morale. Now, there are going to be certain situations in the game where events can happen to your crew that will force it to take morale tests. Morale tests are unopposed stat tests of your will. So remember, you're trying to hit that target number 11. Note that skills, rules, and abilities that apply to will tests also apply to morale tests. However, any modifiers that say they apply to morale tests do not apply to will tests. So if you run into any modifiers that say they affect morale and you get grazed, which is also a will test, those morale modifiers will not apply. Now, morale tests will have to be made in 5 situations. Whenever a model is wounded in melee but doesn't go out of action, if the showrunner or any other model serving as leader of the crew goes out of action within 12 inches and within line of sight of a model, when the crew is reduced to 50% of its initial size, when the crew is reduced to 25% of its initial size, and when prompted by a special ability. A morale test must be immediately taken after one of the situations that I've stated above occurs. Now, you can be forced to make multiple morale tests in the same turn. Now, if the model passes the morale test, it's much like the graze. Nothing happens.
Now, if a model fails its morale test, it must make an immediate move action toward the edge of the board where it started, or the nearest board edge if it did not deploy at a board edge, as is indicated in some of the scenarios in the book, and if possible, end in cover. Now, if a model is forced to leave melee combat because of a failed morale test, each enemy model in base contact may make a free out-of-sequence attack against it. So, let's use example here. Our model is in melee. We'll say this one charged, did a melee attack. She survived just fine. She takes her shotgun, shoots the showrunner, and successfully takes him out of action. Then this model fails its morale test. Now, as we've said, it made a charge, so it's already made one move action this turn. So, when it fails its morale test, it will move towards its nearest board edge. We'll say that's that way. It has to roll d6 and end in cover. So let's say it rolls, it gets a 3, but the problem is we run into terrain here. Remember, you just have to move towards the nearest board edge and, if possible, get into cover. So you can play around with where the model will go, maybe behind light cover, maybe try heavy cover. It's going to rely up to what your group thinks is acceptable. We'll be fleeing 3 inches this way and going behind heavy cover, even though it's not the shortest route to the deployed board edge. Or we'll be going through here and getting jammed up in this difficult light terrain, but technically you still get the bonus of the cover. So once again, this is a gentleman's game of friends and ladies. So now let's talk about if you roll a fumble, because a morale test only applies for this moment you take it. So if this model failed its morale test and it ran away once, it's not permanently broken. However, if you roll a fumble, which is that very low natural score, then it's gone completely. This model just goes off the board. Now, you could run into situations where a model is forced to take both a will test for being grazed and a morale test. So this most often occurs when a model with more than one wound suffers a gunfire wound. Now, if this occurs, the model will take the morale test first, not the graze test. So you'll take the will test. If you pass, then you can take your graze test. However, if you fail your will test, you'll take your graze test and run a little bit more and try to get behind cover. That's the one exception to the order of the morale test.
Now, in games of Reality's Edge, it is possible just to forfeit, or as the rulebook calls it on page 45, strategic withdrawal. This is especially important if you're playing campaign games, as when you start mounting up casualties, you start losing leaders or taking serious injuries to your crew, this will have knock-on effects to other scenarios you play and building your crew. So there might be a time when you say, keep playing this scenario, there's nothing to be gained. So at the beginning of a turn, before rolling initiative, the player can announce that they are cutting their losses and enacting strategic withdrawal. They remove all models from the field. The player will still roll on the survival table as usual for models that are out of action, but there are no other negative impacts on models by withdrawing. When a player withdraws, it is assumed that the opponent won the scenario. However, even if the player withdraws, it gets to keep the rewards earned, cat terminals hacked, grudge operation kills, and anything else they earned at the battlefield. However, any unclaimed rewards automatically go to the other player or team. Thank you for watching this episode on Morale for how to play Reality's Edge, and please join us next time as we cover hacking.